I'm not someone who makes everything about herself. I want you to know that, before anything else. I grew up going to Mass every Sunday in a town outside of Ottawa, where everyone knew everyone, and my grandmother used to say that a woman who keeps score is a woman who's already lost. I believed her. For a long time I believed her so completely that I convinced myself the way my family treated me was just the way things were, that some people are born into families where they are the point of the story, and some people are born to fill in the background. I thought I was the second kind. I'm not sure anymore. My name is Tessa. I grew up in a suburb called Stittsville, which is one of those places that has a gas station, a Tim Hortons, a dollar store, and about 4,000 people who all somehow know what you had for dinner last Tuesday. My parents, I'll call them my mother and my father, because that's what they are, biologically, were not cruel people. That's the part that took me the longest to untangle. They didn't yell. They didn't drink. They went to church. They paid their taxes. My father coached my brother's hockey team every winter for 11 years, and my mother made the best butter tart squares at every school bake sale, without fail. To the people of Stittsville, Ontario, they were good people. To me, inside that house, they were something more complicated. They were people who had already given everything they had to my brother by the time I came along, and they just never quite refilled. My brother is 3 years older than me. His name doesn't matter here, but his presence in our house mattered enormously. It was tidal. Everything moved toward him. When he got his first goal in Pee Wee hockey, my father cried. Actual tears. I was 7 years old and I remember thinking, I have never seen my father cry. I filed that away somewhere. I filed a lot of things away. I got my first academic award in grade 4, best in the school for reading comprehension. A little bronze-plated thing they handed out at assembly. My mother put it on the windowsill in the laundry room, not the mantel, not the kitchen. The laundry room, next to the Tide Pods and a broken clock we'd stopped winding. My brother's hockey photos covered the entire hallway going up the stairs. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this so you understand that by the time I was 15, I had already learned to need very little from the people in that house. I'd gotten so good at it that needing nothing started to feel like a personality trait. Efficient. Self-contained. Fine. The story I actually want to tell you starts when I was 22. I was in my last semester at Carleton University, finishing a degree in health sciences, working 2 jobs. One at a medical clinic downtown filing patient intake forms, one weekend shift at a grocery store, because rent in Ottawa for even a shared basement apartment is not something you want to know about if you're trying to sleep at night. I had applied to a graduate program in healthcare administration at the University of Toronto. It was competitive. It had a waitlist that wrapped around the block. I had written the application by myself at a library desk at 11 o'clock at night, because the Wi-Fi at my apartment flickered in and out, and I couldn't risk losing the file. I didn't tell my parents I'd applied. Not because I wanted to be secretive. I want to be honest about that. I just knew, the way you know certain things about the weather by how your knees feel before the snow, that telling them would cost me something. My mother would immediately redirect the conversation to whether my brother had thought about going back to school. My father would nod along. And I'd spend the rest of the visit feeling like I'd tried to pass a note in class and handed it to the wrong person, so I kept it to myself. In the meantime, my brother had started seeing someone. A woman he'd been dating for about 5 months, and from the moment she appeared, my parents treated her like she was the daughter they'd always wanted. Which, considering they actually had a daughter, was something I had to sit with for a while. She came to Sunday dinners and my mother made her favorite dish, this mushroom risotto that she'd learned specifically because this woman had mentioned once that she loved it. My mother never learned my favorite meal. I'm not even sure she knew what it was. Lemon pasta, for the record. I still make it myself. The night everything finally broke open was a Friday in March. My brother had texted the family group chat, the one where I mostly appear as a read receipt, saying he had big news. My mother called me, which was notable, because she usually only called when she needed me to look something up online or explain how to change her phone settings. Come Sunday, she said, we're doing a big family dinner. Big family dinner meant my grandmother, 2 aunts, my uncle, various cousins, and approximately 15 side conversations I wasn't part of. I drove the 40 minutes from Ottawa to Stittsville in the rain, which in early March in Ontario means you're essentially navigating a grey slush apocalypse. What I didn't know, and what nobody had mentioned in the group chat or on the phone, or in any of the texts I'd received in the preceding week, was that this dinner was also meant to be a celebration for me. Let me be more precise about that. They knew. My acceptance letter had been forwarded to my parents' address, an old habit, a leftover from when I'd used their place as a mailing address in first year and never properly updated everything. And my mother had opened it. I found this out later. She had opened my letter, read it, and decided that Sunday dinner would be the moment she told me. Which sounds sweet, except for the order of operations. I walked in and the whole house smelled like that mushroom risotto. There was a banner, an actual paper banner someone had ordered or made, stretched across the dining room archway. It said, in big cheerful letters, "Congratulations, the two of you, not me, not my acceptance. The two of them, my brother and his girlfriend." He had proposed. She'd said yes. I stood in the doorway of my parents' house in my wet coat, reading that banner, and there was this moment, maybe 4 seconds long, where I genuinely thought I had walked into the wrong house. My grandmother saw my face. She's the only one who did. She started to say something, and then my aunt was calling everyone to come see the ring. And the moment passed the way those moments do, like a stone dropped into water that nobody admits made a sound. My mother hugged the girlfriend. My father shook my brother's hand and then pulled him into one of those one-armed man hugs he reserved for things that really mattered. There was Prosecco. Someone had bought Prosecco. My family does not buy Prosecco. We are a beer and rye on ice family. Someone had put in actual effort. I hung my coat up, I found a chair. I sat down. About 20 minutes in, my mother came over to the kitchen, where I was pouring myself a glass of water. She said, "Oh, and Tessa, there was a letter for you. On the counter. Under the fruit bowl. Under the fruit bowl. My acceptance letter to the University of Toronto School of Graduate Studies. Healthcare Administration, one of 32 spots in the country, was under a fruit bowl in my parents' kitchen, while 20 people at obligatory engagement in the next room. I picked it up. I opened it. I read it there, standing alone next to the kitchen sink, with the sound of my family laughing carrying through the wall. I got in. Full offer. A partial bursary through the school, OSAP eligibility, and a research stipend attached to a professor's ongoing health equity study. I had done it. I had actually done it. The thing I had worked toward for 3 years. The thing I had rebuilt my entire financial life around planning for. The thing I had cried about in a university library bathroom at midnight because I didn't think I was enough. I'd gotten it. I stood there, and I did not cry. I folded the letter back into the envelope. I put it in my bag. I went back to the table and I ate the mushroom risotto, and I smiled at all the right moments, and I said congratulations to my brother. And I meant it, because I'm not someone who can't be happy for other people. I meant every word. But I also went home that night and sat in my parked car in the lot behind my apartment building for a long time. Just sitting there in the dark with the engine ticking, thinking, that was my news. That was supposed to be my day, too. Nobody ever asked what was under that fruit bowl. I moved to Toronto in August. I gave my landlord proper notice. I packed my car twice. I found a room in a house share in the East End with 2 other grad students, and I left. My mother texted me the week before I moved to ask if I needed the old bedspread from my childhood room. That was the extent of the conversation about my relocation to a city 5 hours away to begin a competitive graduate program. The first few months were hard in the specific way that starting over is always hard. Not dramatic, just relentless. Everything cost money. I was carefully rationing. The transit system in Toronto has a learning curve I was not prepared for. My roommates were kind, but we were all busy and exhausted, and there were a lot of nights where I heated up soup and ate it, standing over the kitchen sink, because sitting down at a table alone felt worse. Somehow, but I found things. I always find things. I found a study group that became a friend group. I found a professor who took my work seriously and said so directly and without qualifiers. I found a running trail along the waterfront that I went to on Sunday mornings, and that became the closest thing I had to church in those early months. And then, 4 months into the program, my roommate forwarded me a government notice she'd found in our mailbox by accident. It was addressed to me, but she'd grabbed it without looking. It was from the National Student Loans Service Center, NSLSC. And it was flagging an inconsistency in my OSAP file. Someone had submitted documentation to the Provincial Student Aid Office claiming I was still a dependent living in the family home in Stittsville. If that claim had gone through unchallenged, it would have reclassified me as a dependent student. My bursary eligibility would have changed. The research stipend, which was partly need-based, would have been reassessed. I was looking at potentially losing somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000 in funding I had planned my entire year around. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I read that letter 3 times. There are moments in your life when something you half suspected but never said out loud suddenly has a document attached to it. I can tell you exactly what that feels like. It feels like standing on ice that you thought was thick and hearing it crack, not under your feet, but somewhere off to the side. Like you almost made it. Like someone was watching you almost make it, and they pulled something. I called the financial aid office at the university the next morning. I spoke to a woman who was calm and professional, and who had clearly dealt with this before, which was both reassuring and devastating. She walked me through the dispute process. I needed to prove independent student status, 12 months of tax filing as an individual, proof of residence, employer records, bank statements showing self-sufficiency. I had all of it, because I had always had all of it. I had been financially independent since I was 19 years old. My parents had not contributed to my education, not a single tuition payment, not a single grocery run, not a single e-transfer that I could find in 4 years of bank records. I had the records to prove every single one of those years. The dispute took 11 weeks. 11 weeks of scanning documents, writing statements, getting things notarized at a UPS store on my lunch break, following up on emails that went unanswered for days. I was doing this while keeping a 3.8 GPA and working a part-time position at the university's Health Policy Research Center, and pretending, to the people around me, that everything was fine. My grandmother called during that time. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than people acknowledge, and then she said, "You keep going, baby. That's what you do. You just keep going." She's 79, and she's been saying that to me my whole life, and somehow it still works. I won the dispute. The file was corrected. My funding was restored. I never confronted my parents directly. I thought about it for a long time. I imagined the phone call, imagined my father's voice going quiet and my mother getting defensive. Imagined the conversation ending with me, somehow apologizing for making them feel accused. I'd had that conversation before in different forms, and I knew how it went. I decided I wasn't going to do it again. What I did instead was stop pretending things were okay. I stopped calling every few weeks to check in. I stopped being the person who absorbs the silence and then reached back in to fill it. I stopped making myself small enough to fit into a space in that family where I had never actually fit. When they reached out, I was polite. When my mother texted on holidays, I texted back something brief and warm. But I let the distance be real this time, instead of something I was constantly working against. That spring, something shifted in me. I had finished my first full year with standing on the dean's list. My research had been cited in a working paper. My professor was submitting to a public health journal. I had stood up at a grad school conference and presented findings in front of 80 people and not passed out. I was building something real, one semester at a time, out of my own effort and my own choices, and the weight of carrying all of that alone had started to feel less like a burden and more like proof. Proof that I was capable, that I had always been capable, that the people who were supposed to see that first had simply chosen to look elsewhere. I started writing about it. Not for anyone at first. Just for me. I had a notes app on my phone full of half-finished thoughts, and I started putting them together into something longer. About what it's like to grow up in a family where you are technically present but functionally invisible. About the specific texture of watching your parents celebrate someone else while your own news sits under a fruit bowl. About what self-sufficiency costs you emotionally when it's not a choice but a survival strategy you learned before you were 10. I put it up on a small blog. No promotion. No announcement. Just a post, sitting on the internet. Within 6 weeks, it had been shared nearly 60,000 times. The comments were the part I wasn't ready for. Women my age. Women my mother's age. Women who were teenagers. Women who were retired school teachers in Newfoundland, and single mothers in Manitoba, and university students in Saskatoon. Writing paragraphs about how they had never seen their lives described so exactly by a stranger. People who thought they were the only ones. People who had spent decades convincing themselves that what happened to them wasn't significant enough to name. I answered every single one. It took me 3 weeks of late nights, but I answered everyone. A producer for a podcast, one I actually listened to, which was surreal, reached out and asked if I'd come on to talk about family estrangement and the particular experience of the overlooked child. We recorded for 2.5 hours. I cried twice. So did she. The episode was their most downloaded of the year. My aunt texted me a screenshot of my mother's Facebook post the week it came out. My mother had written something about how when a family member tells only their version of events, the truth is the casualty. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. I looked at that screenshot for a long time, and then I closed it. Because here is what I know now, at 26, living in a 2-room apartment in Toronto, that I chose and that I pay for with money I earned. With a cat named Fig who is extremely opinionated about when dinner happens, with a handful of friends who texted me at midnight on my birthday, because they actually remembered. I am not in a competition I have to win. The life I have built is not a rebuttal. It's just a life. My life. And it is more than I was ever told to expect. My relationship with my parents exists now in the particular register of formal warmth. Christmas calls that run about 12 minutes. Birthday texts that I respond to. A dinner last Thanksgiving that was pleasant in the way that a dentist's waiting room is pleasant. We are not estranged. We are also not close. I have accepted that those might be the only 2 options available to us, and I have accepted that I cannot make them choose differently. I can only choose how much of myself I bring to a table that was never quite set for me. My brother and I text sometimes. He has surprised me. A few months ago, he told me he'd listened to the podcast and that he'd known, growing up, that something was off. That he used to feel guilty when Mom and Dad did things for him that they didn't do for me. But he didn't know how to say it. I told him it wasn't his burden to carry. He was a kid. We were both just kids in the same house, and what happened in that house wasn't his fault any more than it was mine. He seemed genuinely relieved to hear that. I think he'd been holding it for years. My grandmother still calls every Sunday at 7. She always asks the same question first. Tell me something good. And I always have something. That's the thing nobody warned me about when I started letting myself build a real life. The good things accumulate, slowly, and then all at once. I'm writing this because I know there is someone reading it who learned, very young, to want less. Who got so precise at adjusting their expectations downward that they stopped noticing they were doing it. Who watched someone else get the cake, get the banner, get the Prosecco and the party and the paper sign across the archway. And who said nothing because they had learned, long ago, that saying something only ever made things worse. I want you to know that the quiet you learn to keep is not the same as being okay, and the fact that no one saw what was happening to you does not mean it didn't happen. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to put your name at the top of the letter. You are allowed to want your news to be news. The hardest thing I have ever done was not moving cities or disputing a financial aid file or rebuilding a support system from scratch in a place where I knew almost no one. The hardest thing I have ever done was convince myself, slowly, over years, that I was worth the effort I was putting into my own life. Even though the first people who should have told me that never quite did. They still haven't. If I'm honest, maybe they will. Maybe they won't. I've stopped building my peace around the answer. What I know is this. You don't need the people who forgot you to remember you now in order to start. You already have everything you need to begin. You had it all along. The story isn't over. Mine certainly isn't. But for the first time in my life, I'm the one deciding what happens next. And that, finally, is enough.